Hey everybody, and welcome back to my studio. I hope you've had an excellent week. It's so good to see everybody here again. Now I have a question for you. Would you consider yourself an experimental photographer? Well, I kind of hope so, because really every time we take our cameras out and get a shot, we're really experimenting with the light, aren't we? Well, this week I want to encourage you to push that boundary just a little bit more and be more experimental in your photography and take some chances. Really, just go for it. So stick around, this video is going to be a lot of fun. So this week was a really awesome and productive week for me. I had a rare opportunity to actually have a paid assignment to shoot landscape photography in Broken Bow. I can't think of a better thing than that, right? So I went out to Broken Bow and looked at the weather, and Monday was going to be the only day this week that looked fruitful. And kind of a cool thing happened. There was some fog on Monday morning, and I was really hoping to get down to Lower Mountain Fork. I wasn't really scheduled to start shooting on the clock, as you would say, until afternoon. So I went really early, met up with my buddy Randy Sander, and we went hiking around the Beavers Bend area. And to our surprise, the fog, which really was with us during the drive in, sort of lifted and was just hanging out over the tops of the mountains the whole time we were shooting in the morning. And I was a little indecisive about what to shoot, but you know, last week I mentioned I was trying to get more into shooting wildlife photography. So I put that 200 to 500 lens on my camera and walked around and kind of looked around the horizon, and I spotted a few big eagles sitting up in these trees, and they were so far away that I really couldn't get a good shot, but suddenly one of those eagles broke loose from the branch he was sitting on and flew directly towards me. Now, I'm not saying I know exactly what I'm doing with wildlife photography yet, but I did go ahead and preemptively set my autofocus for auto area constant continuous AF, and I racked up my ISO to about 2000, 2500, and I used about a 2000th of a second shutter speed. And I just had those settings on the camera. I kind of looked around to sort of see if the exposure was going to work. I shot a few pictures of some ducks. They turned out okay. But when this eagle flew over me, I just threw the camera up and just started just taking shots as fast as the autofocus would acquire a shot and shoot. And I actually got my first shot of a bald eagle in flight. Now, it's a little grainy, a little blurry, not too detailed, and it's really just not that great. And the sky was, of course, just milky. But I'm pretty proud of it. It was my first action shot of a bird in flight, and I can kind of see the eagle's pupil, which means that the camera did acquire focus pretty well. It was a little overexposed, so I lost some of that detail around, especially it fringed a little bit on me, but hey, I'm getting started. So I would consider that shot really an experimental shot because it was my first time trying it. I was just seeing how the camera behaved in action, acquiring focus. I let the camera decide where it was going to focus, and the Z7 actually did a pretty good job. I know that some of the other Nikons are better, like the D850 is of course going to acquire that focus a little bit faster, but I was pretty impressed for the mirrorless camera acquiring focus with this guy flying so fast at me. So it worked. The next thing I tried after the sun started to break through the fog was I found this stream where water was flowing and the sun was really harsh. And typically you don't shoot waterfalls when the sun is dappled or coming through, but you know what? This was just an experimental shot. So I said, okay, I'll try it. And I positioned the camera in the shadow of a tree so that it wasn't totally blasting out into the lens and flaring everywhere, but I had backlit quality to the moss that was on the edges of the trees. It looked pretty cool. And so this again was another experimental shot. So I would encourage you just to, if you see something, try something. Come away with a shot no matter what. just keep experimenting, and if you see something and it doesn't really work out, move and try something else again. And I'll have to say that I've learned more from these experiments than I have just looking at other shots and just trying to go for the same old thing that you see all the time. So I would say just keep experimenting. And this may not be one of my favorite shots, but I learned some stuff from this. It wasn't the greatest waterfall, but this is a technique that I may use again to hide that camera behind the tree in the shadow and shoot into the sun, and I got this waterfall picture. So then my commercial assignment day started. I was up in Woodland Hills. It's a new subdivision around Broken Bow, and I actually bought a piece of property in Woodland Hills, and so that's how I got to know the owner of this development. And he wanted me to take some shots of this new area that he's about to open up called the Woodland Creeks, and it's not even really surveyed yet. He just said, hey Jason, go find these creeks, find these streams, and start shooting, just to kind of give us an idea of the personality of this area. I was all about it. And he also wanted me to go up on the bluffs at the end of the day to try to get some sunset shots. So I hiked around, got down in the creeks, shot some of these forks where the creeks and streams kind of came together. It was really mossy and unbelievable amount of color considering this is the dead of winter, right? So even this was really kind of an experimental shot to try to get the essence of these creeks in the dead of winter. And there wasn't a lot of motion in the water, but there was some really neat things happening with moss, with rocks, with trees. So I experimented down in these creeks, shooting in this dappled light. And then ultimately, I got up to this ridge right as the sun was about to set, and I started shooting off of this area called the Bluffs, where you can see for 40 to 50 miles off of this ridge. And this was my favorite experiment of the day. Is, of course, I shot, my typical classic Jason pano of the sunset going down, before the sun actually set, to get those rays and the backlit foliage. That's like my favorite light of all. But something neat kind of stuck out to me, and that is when you're standing on this ridge, you want to convey to people how far you can see. But with a really wide pano that's shot with a wide angle lens, you know how the mountains in the distance look even more distant. They're just so tiny that you really can't get any of that detail. So I was thinking to myself, I really wish that I could give people the best of both worlds. I want them to see that wide vista, but at the same time, I kind of want to show them that beautiful sort of stair step back of the mountains, as you can kind of see between these mountains, and then another layer of ridge, and then beyond that there's another layer of ridge, and then beyond that another one. You can see that all the way into the sunset after that sun had gone down. And I love that. Growing up in Kentucky, I would hike to the top of the hills just so that I could see those cascading hills going back in the Appalachian Mountains. And in Broken Bow, this was kind of the same thing in the Ouachita Mountains. So how do I convey that? So an idea hit me. I thought, okay, I shoot panos all the time, but I shoot them wide. Why not try to shoot a pano at super tight, long lens zoom? So I got the 200 to 500 and put this little adapter shoe on the foot of the glass. And then of course the camera was on here. I'm not using the camera here because it's filming right now. But you can at least see my setup. This was pretty close to what I had. And I zoomed to 200 or 360, somewhere in there. And this is a Nodal Ninja. And typically it has hard stops so that when you're taking a panorama, it will actually stop. This one's set right now at 20 degrees. So with a wide angle lens, it keeps your shots consistently as you move to the next position. It gives you a perfect 20-degree increment so that you have the proper amount of overlap. Say you're on a 20 millimeter lens or a 24, somewhere around there, and you can always change it. However, I looked, and the minimum amount of degree stair step is 7.5 degrees. And even at that, it was making this lens move so far that it was just giving me a tiny bit of overlap, if not zero overlap. It was actually having gaps and skipping it. So there's no way to merge photos if you've got a big gap in between, right? So I had to MacGyver this rig and unscrew the hard stop click stop, and I had to basically manually turn and lock the whole apparatus from moving with this little knob. And I noticed too that this shakes quite a bit. Just every time I made an adjustment to the camera, this would be shaking. And at 200 or 360 millimeters, that little bit of shake would throw all the trees and things out of focus. So I had to set my shot, lock this down, take my hands off the rig, and I set a timer, a 2-second delay on my camera to take a 3 bracket shot. So each time it would take 3 shots. And so I would do that and then loosen this screw and watch for one tree that was in my shot. Of course I had live view on, and I would twist until I saw a tree from one side move to the other side but still be in the frame, and then I would lock it down again. So I don't know if I had perfectly consistent overlap, but I was visually making sure that I had ample overlap in order to pull off a panorama, which turned out to be 15 200 or beyond millimeter cropped shots that were stitched together to make this massive wide angle pano over those cascading hills. The sun was down, the color in the clouds was amazing. I had to do 3 shots at 2 stop brackets over and under to make sure that I could get the hills and that sky without overexposing and blasting it out. But once I stitched all those together, I found that they came together like butter. And it actually turned out to be a really nice high resolution shot that I'm pretty proud of. And now that I've kind of experimented with this rig, I know that in 2020, I'll probably see some more opportunities to employ this technique. And it's all from that little experiment. Just having some gear, it's not really made, to shoot those tiny little incremental stops. This is at 20 millimeters, or 20 degrees, I mean, and that's just not gonna cut it. So figure out a way that you can even manipulate your gear and make it do things that it's really not even supposed to do. So the ultimate story here is just go for it and just MacGyver it. Trust me. How many of you have seen that show? I grew up watching MacGyver every day when I got home from school. So if I throw that term out, it's because that was like my childhood favorite show, okay? So MacGyver's awesome. I don't care what you say, you can argue with me, but MacGyver's awesome. So MacGyver your rig and take chances and experiment with things. So I want to ask you, what kind of experiments are you thinking of doing? And what makes you afraid of trying some of these new experiments? Or have you just not had an opportunity to try? I wish you would. I wish 2020 would be an experimental year, because I really think that's how you advance your photography forward, is just by taking chances and just going for it. So I found this cool Bible verse from Ecclesiastes. My goodness, what a book, right? I wish everybody would read that book at least one time. One of the smartest men who ever lived, full of wisdom, wrote this for us to give us knowledge about how to live our lives. Anyway, this verse is from the New Living Translation, and listen how appropriate this is for what we're talking about. Plant your seed in the morning and keep busy all afternoon, for you don't know if profit will come from one activity or another, or maybe both. So I can't make it any more clear than that. Keep experimenting. Stay in the posture of experimenting with your photography, because you just don't know which one of those is going to be fruitful. And it could blow you away with what you come away with. So guys, I hope this video has been helpful to you. If it has, please consider subscribing to my channel. And click that little bell so you'll know every single time I go live with another episode. So I want to challenge you to get out there and experiment. Push the envelope. Get in the zone and push yourself to experiment and take chances with your photography. I hope that 2020 is a pivotal year for you. I hope you have a lot of growth in your photography, as well as I hope that same thing for myself. I just can't think of anything better than being out with God and exploring His creation with our cameras and a little bit of childlike wonder and even a little bit of risk taking. So I want to leave you with that one challenge this week, and that is just go for it with your photography. Thanks for tuning in today, and I hope y'all have an excellent week. See you again on the next episode. And if you happen to miss any of my content from 2019, here come links to 2 more videos. Thanks, guys.